From KPFK in Los Angeles, California, Valley Free Radio in Florence, Massachusetts, WNUC in Detroit, and BikeTalk.org worldwide, this is Bike Talk.
Bike Talk.
Welcome to Bike Talk. I'm Taylor Nichols.
And I'm Nick Richard.
Hey, Nick. Let's start with some good news, eh?
Okay.
CNN reports that riding your bike may help you prevent cognitive decline, a 19% lower risk for all-cause dementia, and a 22% lower risk of Alzheimer's compared with non-active travel. That's good.
Yeah, we just say it all the time. We wouldn't need to go to gyms if we would be able to walk or bike to where we're going.
Isn't the science guy, Bill Nye the Science Guy, says there's something wrong with a society that drives a car to ride a bike in a gym. And I think that's so true.
Yeah.
That if we could just ride our bikes, we wouldn't need the gym. As I said a couple of weeks ago, a soul cycle is to cycling what foosball is to soccer. But, now it's not just us that are saying that. It's CNN, it's JAMA, the journal is saying that. So there's some data that is proving what, of course, you and I and our listeners already know.
Mm-hmm.
If you're liking our show, please support us. Give us a thumbs up or a like, or even better yet, leave a comment on whatever platform you listen to Bike Talk. Because comments and likes really help us reach new listeners and a wider audience. And as we talked about last week, the more people we get to swallow that orange pill, the better off we'll be with more people on bikes. I think the League of American Bicyclists says the world is better for everyone when more people ride bikes. And so if more people listen to our show, maybe more people will ride bikes.
And then less dementia.
And then less dementia, exactly.
And you're in Michigan.
Yes, I'm in Michigan. And, it's been great. I've been traveling. I was in New York, and now I'm in Michigan doing a little indie film. And as good as it is that we can be connected and do our show while you or I are traveling, it does mean that occasionally, and I think last week was a great example of that, where the internet connection or the sound quality, because I don't have my mic with me, is not up to our standards. And so I apologize for some of my interviews last week that just didn't sound great. And I hope it sounds good tonight because I'm in my dad's house. He just had his 101st birthday, which is pretty cool.
Happy birthday.
And so I don't know what the sound is like.
Yeah, we'll find out. Someone on Bluesky disagreed with something that was said in the Diana Lisa interview a couple episodes back. If you tell a red person they should bike to Costco, they're like, that's crazy. But they're not wrong.
No, they're not wrong.
They probably get killed. Or I don't know.
Yeah,
No,
and that's their first assumption.
Because
that's their first assumption is that you're going to have to bike to Costco. And my book basically says, no, that's ridiculous. Why would you ever bike to Costco? You should be walking and biking and taking the tram to your libraries, to your bakeries, to your soap shops, to, things that are quaint and charming and giving you the amenities that you're hoping for, but not in a commercial box store.
So I immediately try to take it back because I know, that's one of the big tropes on social media is look how I bike to Costco. And what do you think? Because I know you shop by bike.
Yeah, I think you can and you should bike to Costco. I think Diane was trying to make the point that talking to a newbie to make them think about riding their bike and shopping at Costco on a bike is just too much. It's a bridge too far for someone who's not used to it. I saw that post on Bluesky, and I love it when people shop at Costco or, any of those big store places. And, when you buy toilet paper, you don't have to buy 84 rolls at a time.
Well, Costco is car infrastructure.
Right.
The reason that we have Costco is because we don't have places you can walk or bike to when you run out of toilet paper.
Right. And I think Diane was saying that our world is better when we shop at local stores for stuff like that anyways. Someone could argue that toilet paper costs more at the corner store than it does at Costco. But you could also drive your car to Costco, once a year. I don't know.
There's another listener email from Robert Prinz. It was about our discussion. We had Charles Marohn
Chuck was saying that, the federal funding of bike infrastructure really just gets in the way because it's kind of dumb funding. And Robert Prinz knows from which he speaks. He's the advocacy director for Bike East Bay and has been on the show many times. And he brought up some great points.
He said, on the latest Bike Talk episode during your interview with Chuck, he mentioned his issues with federal funding for bikeway projects, which I get and appreciate. However, I wanted to follow up and note that the issues aren't inherent. While not likely under the current administration, here are some changes to federal infrastructure funding that could help.
He breaks it down, but the number one bullet point he has is significantly increase the amount of federal formula funding and earmark more of it for bikeway projects and walk projects, which I think makes sense.
Number 2, keep large grant-funded bike walk projects around as well, but change the award scope. Labor unions, in particular, like mega projects, because the large scope enables job site training and apprenticeship opportunities stretching over multiple years on a single gig.
We want working people to have jobs, and I'd rather have them build bikeway projects than highway projects. And, that's one of the things that Robert Moses counted on when he was pushing projects in New York City, was he really counted on getting labor's backing to support these highway projects that ruin neighborhoods. And this third bullet point is reduce environmental study requirements for bike, walk, transit projects. And that's something that's been holding up a lot of projects. Neighbors sue for these CEQA studies that slow down any project.
CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act. It means that even a bike lane has to have study
A
before.
study, yeah. But this makes me think of what we've been talking about lately on the show, also Fountain Avenue in my neighborhood in Los Angeles, and about the city council meetings that have been going on forever. They've been doing tons of meetings. And finally, at this last meeting, there was the vote. And we got a message from someone who spoke at the meeting. And let's play that really quick because it's kind of funny, the stuff that he says about putting in a bike lane on Fountain Avenue.
Greetings. As the owner and operator of a motor vehicle, a Toyota Corolla to be precise, I fully support this streetscape proposal because every time I get in my car and drive on Fountain Avenue, there's some entitled cyclist that slows me down. They barely go 12 miles an hour, and I've got to sit there seething, trying to find an opportunity when I can get around them. And then when I finally do, I got to speed up, and they're just so entitled, taking up space, causing even more traffic. They need their own space. Give them their bike lanes. Let them have it so that I can be on my way. Now, on the flip side, I also am an entitled cyclist. I cycle to work 3 days a week, 5.5 miles to downtown in LA, and I tell you, there are plenty of entitled drivers who drive up my butt, they honk at me, they yell at me, they close past me, they brake check me, they tell me, get out of the way, and I can't because there's no bike lane. So if West Hollywood passes this proposal, it's going to be a win-win for drivers and cyclists, and we can all get on our way, and we can all arrive home safely.
Thank you.
The plan to build the bike lane on Fountain Avenue passed 3-2. So they are going to move forward with the pilot project of installing a protected bike lane on a pretty major east-west thoroughfare through West Hollywood.
And congratulations, that's your neighborhood.
Yeah. Next up, Nick, we have Monica Garrison, who is the founder and exec director of an organization that we've talked about before on the show.
Hey guys, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are the founder of Black Girls Do Bike?
That is correct, yes. Founded in 2013, and now we're in our 12th year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you have chapters everywhere, right?
Yeah, the momentum has kind of dominoed across the years, but essentially right now we have about 30,000 members, and we have over 100 chapters, which is across the U.S. We also have some international chapters as well. And then we have about 180 ladies who we call sheroes, and those are the women who are leading the way, boots on the ground, leading the rides and executing every day for us.
And that's what the Knox Academy is about, correct? It's creating more sheroes.
Yeah, and even beyond. So our sheroes are leaders in their communities, and we always wanted to have some sort of education program where we equip them to be safety coordinators, as well as so that they can set up programs in their local communities to educate children and other women. So Knox Academy was a logical next step to kind of lead the way in organizing these women and giving them the skills they need.
And LEAD is even an acronym, right? For L, leadership, E, education, A, advocacy, and D, development.
Yes. Yeah, those are kind of all the points we want to hit with Knox Academy. Again, it's work that we've been doing for the last 12 years, but this is a way to have a pipeline, really, to take women who aren't educators, who may be lacking certain skills, and then give them the skill set that they need to not only benefit our organization for the next 5-10 years plus, but also, again, to give back to their communities. We actually partnered with the League of American Bicyclists, and they put together a class of, I think, about 15 ladies who were all sheroes in our organization, and they all came together in North Carolina and spent, I believe it was a 3-day course altogether. And it was beautiful. I wasn't there in person, unfortunately, but I was able to see pictures and videos from the participants. All the ladies graduated and made some lifelong friendships for sure.
And when they graduate, they get the LCI certification also, and that's through the League, which is League Certified Instructor, right?
Yes, which opens a lot of doors to them even beyond, again, Black Girls Do Bike as a League instructor. You carry insurance when you lead rides. You can become part of their network of instructors and teach all over the country. There are lots of benefits for them, even career-wise, if they wanted to take that path.
It's funny you say they carry insurance. That's something that we talked about last week on the show with our lawyer, Jim Pokrass, about, when does a ride need insurance and when does a ride need waivers? And so this is really an interesting topic you bring up.
I have to listen to that one because I have those questions myself.
Well, Jim can answer them if you listen to Bike Talk.
So they just do what an LCI does then, right?
My understanding is you have 2 levels. So you can be an LCI, which allows you essentially to teach beginning cyclist skills. And then there are actually LCI coaches who can be a national coach. So that is the person who teaches other LCIs to become LCIs. So it's a career path. Again, if they want to just go around and be an instructor, they can also connect to each other. Like Diana, who's going to be leading Knox Academy, she's out of Cleveland, Ohio, but she is a national coach. I believe she's the second African-American woman national coach that the league has ever certified. And she will be able to travel to other cities and teach, and she'll also be able to host clinics in her city and have ladies come to her. But it's nice because there are levels to it, so they can, learn all the skills they need. And it's a pretty intense program. I don't know if either of you have taken the course, but I sat in on a class in Columbus, Ohio a couple of months ago, and I was really impressed with how thorough the teaching is and how much is required of the future LCIs to pass the test. Again, these are skills that you won't pick up unless you're a really, really seasoned cyclist. And so we're kind of accelerating their knowledge.
Right. Yeah, Nick and I are both LCIs. And
awesome.
The training is intense. And it really changed this is something we've talked about before, how I ride a bike on the street. And I think it's very important. Before we turned on the recording, Nick and Monica, you and I, all of us were talking about whether we are vehicular cyclists, quote unquote. And these skills allow you to protect yourself if you ever are in an environment where the road's not safe. So I think it's a very worthy program.
Yeah. We're also going to have a secondary program, we're calling it a ride leader program, which is a separate curriculum, but it also does overlap the LCI curriculum. So for ladies who don't want to become LCIs, but they want to be, thoroughly educated and ready to go as ride leaders, again, with us or beyond, then they can also just take the ride leader course. So we're trying to cover everyone's needs in the Knox Academy.
Well, do you want to talk about Black Girls Do Bike and, the inspiration for that?
Sure. It's a story that goes back to this, again, the summer of 2013. And I was in a situation where I just was mentally and physically drained, not at my best. And my first thought was, at what point in my life was I most happy and most carefree? And I thought about my summers off from school as a child riding my bike. That was the happiest I was. So I wanted to somehow recapture that time. So I went to a bike shop, did a lot of research, bought a beautiful Specialized bike, and rode it that summer and had the time of my life. I lost weight. I relieved stress. I connected with my kids in a entirely new way, and they were riding with me a lot. And one thing I noticed, obviously, it was that there weren't a lot of women who looked like me on bikes as I was riding. And I thought, one, that should change, because if this helped me, then it would definitely help other women, and specifically women of color. And then also, if there was an opportunity to spread the joy of cycling, then I looked first for another organization that may have already started this. And there were some in different cities around the country, but there was no national org. So Black Girls Do Bike was originally just a way for folks to come together on Facebook and meet other women who are cyclists, hopefully in their area, but maybe not. And as we progressed, we quickly had women reach out and say, hey, I want to start this as a riding group in my city. And I always say I was kind of apprehensive at first, because I didn't make that connection that was the actual need. But as more people reached out from, pretty much every major city in the U.S., it just kind of made sense. So I was like, well, this is kind of the goal, right? To get more women on bikes, and what better way to do it than to, give them a circle of friends and accountability partners and, other women who are going to be welcoming to cycling. So,
yeah, as well as someone to kind of show you the ropes when you're new at something.
Absolutely. I know that's one of the biggest barriers to cycling is the questions you have, and you don't want to sound silly asking what you might think are simple questions. And some cycling environments aren't as welcoming as others. And so we wanted to kind of lower the barrier to entry and encourage women to show up, at whatever skill level they were, at whatever fitness level they were at, and just try it out and see if you like it.
And one thing great, I think, is, most rides end at a coffee shop. And I love sitting around drinking coffee, with the people I just rode with, and kind of learning more about them, and, reliving some of the ride. So I imagine you all do that too.
Oh, for sure. I'd say coffee, ice cream shops, and breweries.
And breweries.
That's where we seem to end up. But yeah, it's a nice way to support local businesses as well, right? You can show up at a business and infuse it with some funds. And also that's where those friendships are made. During the ride, it's great. You get that feeling of camaraderie. But after the ride, when you're, sitting down and discussing life and work and all those things, that's where you forge the friendships that come out of it.
Right.
The Knox Academy was just the logical next step.
I think so. Yeah. So just kind of starting chapters was the organic next step. We got to this point where, like I said, we're in pretty much every major city, except there are a few states in the Midwest that we haven't infiltrated yet. But we got a pretty wide web across the U.S. And so these chapters are meeting weekly and monthly and doing the thing that we always wanted them to do. And so I always got the question, well, what's next? And it did just kind of make sense as we had a few women in our organization who became LCIs, and we started to see the value of it. And then, as I said, the league reached out to us, and it started this initial class, which just kind of jump-started. And the images of, these beautiful women smiling and happy, spending this time together, it was like, okay, this is, we need to continue this. I don't want it to die here. And so Knox Academy was born out of that desire to keep it going and pay it forward, and equip these women with the skills that they ultimately need to help themselves and help others.
How do people find both Black Girls Do Bike and the Knox Academy?
Sure. Well, blackgirlsdobike.org is our website, and we're on all the social media sites that you would imagine. And then right at the top of our website is a link to Knox Academy, which will show you some pictures of the class that we have. We hope to do another class before the year is out. And it'll give you some history on Kitty Knox, who is the person that we're honoring with Knox Academy. As you said, she was a woman of color who had some things to overcome in her time. And she was relentless and bold and unapologetic. And that's what we always strive to be. So it seems like a, full circle moment to honor her this way in, teaching women to ride and take their knowledge out into the larger cycling community. But yeah, you can find ways to support us on that site, and you can also learn about the classes, what we're going to be offering, and our instructor, Diana Hildebrand, who's going to be taking the lead.
Well, great. Well, Monica Garrison, thank you so much for all you're doing for cycling, but also for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Well, that was Monica Garrison of Black Girls Do Bike talking about her Knox Academy. Next up, we have Chris Bruntlett, and Chris, of course, is of the Dutch Cycling Embassy, and he's been on the show many times. And he covers a lot of ground. He covers bike lash, which I think is really important because that's exactly what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks on the show with our bike lane hater. He also talks about kids and biking, and that's kind of the same thing that Diane Elise has been talking about. And he talks about his upcoming trip to China.
All right.
Lindsay and I are really lucky to have Chris Bruntlett back on the show. He's been on the show many times. And Lindsay and I were talking, Chris, before you came on about, what do we focus on? Do we focus on China? Do we focus on kids and bikes? Do we focus on your new book, which is coming out October 1st, called Women Changing Cities, Global Stories of Urban Transformation? And that comes out October 1st again. Chris Bruntlett, welcome back to Bike Talk.
Thanks for having me, and I'm glad we could squeeze this in. And as you say, where do we start?
Where do we start? But we have to start because you're traveling soon, the worldwide to transform cities in both Canada, and I think you're going to the Far East also, you said, correct?
Yeah, and this is building off of my time in China earlier this year. I was lucky enough to visit for a couple of weeks as kind of a fact-finding diplomatic mission on behalf of the Dutch Cycling Embassy. And that's really turned into some concrete opportunities and invitations to return. There's an MOU, a memorandum of understanding in the works between the Dutch Ministry of Transport and the Chinese Ministry of Transport. So there's really some exciting things happening there that are moving very quickly.
Wow, that's exciting. Before we really get into it, I wanted to ask you about a post that you just did, that it's something that Lindsay and I are both dealing with. Lindsay is, of course, the director of LCI, which is Livable Communities Initiative, and she has had an experience recently. Well, Lindsay, you can say it about the brick wall that you've been up against to kind of move forward.
Yeah, I think that the problem in Los Angeles is we're really struggling with the process. The process and the governance has gotten so complicated. There's so many voices. And in my neighborhood, we have a few organizers, community organizers have gotten the up and down, every single stakeholder group, the businesses, the parcel owners, the people who actually own the land, the residents. Our voting record is 63-0 going to all these groups. Total alignment, and that we want to bring, livable cities and bike lanes and things like that to our neighborhood. And the process to move forward has gotten completely gummed up, and it got gummed up because voters didn't want these things. And now when voters are saying they want these things, there's no system to say yes.
Right. And that goes with, Chris, what I'm dealing with, which is Fountain Avenue through West Hollywood. There was a big meeting last night, and so many of the city council people still spew misinformation about safe streets. And I bring all this up because your most recent article is fighting back against bike lash. And I wonder if you could address not only the article, but some of the things that Lindsay and I and advocates all over North America and maybe even Europe and Asia now are dealing with.
Yeah, and that article stemmed out of a conference session that I did during the VeloCity conference in Gdansk, Poland earlier this year, where we spent basically 2.5 hours, a half day, on this topic of bike lash. And I think bringing my kind of 15 years of experience to the table, I just kind of put together off the top of my head, what were 8 strategies that everybody working in this field of change making, whether you're a politician or an advocate or a civil servant, can utilize, because we see this again and again, that any proposal to make our streets more livable, more inclusive, more safe, do result in this backlash, this controversy, this outrage. But also, as we see again and again, this outrage is not necessarily representative of the larger community. It's small, very organized, very privileged and well-resourced opponents who can disproportionately make something seem far more controversial than it actually is. And so for those people that are perhaps running into these barriers and spending a disproportionate amount of time in bad faith arguments,
right,
arguing with people you're never going to convince and maybe don't necessarily have to convince, to try and get out in front of this and have a broader based, values based conversation about where we want to be as a community, as a society. What do we share in terms of kid friendliness, resiliency and sustainability, more green space in our cities, more social activity on the streets. Most people can agree with that. And
right.
Once we find those consensus items, then we can start having a more nuanced debate about how to get there. So I think I see in general a bit of an inferiority complex of people that are working in this field, and they really need to be more empowered and more emboldened that what they're doing isn't just the right thing, it's the popular thing. Right. If we just get out and talk to people in the community rather than spend so much time in the comment section of our local publication or social media outlet.
Right. And I would even argue in meetings with people, because it seems like the same 4 or 5 bike lane haters show up at almost every meeting.
Precisely. And I think our job as professionals and advocates is to help politicians in particular that are voting on these measures to understand that that's not representative of the community. Talking to your friends is not representative of the community. You need to really go out and talk to people where they live, work, play, shop. You need to have more scientific polling and focus groups, not just the people that have the time, the resources, the privilege to attend these meetings, which are largely, when families are eating dinner or taking care of their loved ones. They don't have the luxury to go out and lobby for something. The smartest thing I ever heard about this was that opposition is much louder than permission, and we can't let, if it's 5 or 10% of the population that are opposed to this, necessarily veto it just because they happen to be more powerful and well connected and have more time on their hands.
Right, and more vocal.
If we talk about a holistic solution where you're adding housing and a bike lane and slowing the traffic, people, as you know, want their traffic slowed. That's like, across the board. People, they want their streets safer. That's an easy one. But once you sat with people, it really comes down to this quality issue, is that when they put in low quality anything, people bristle. And you're right, you'll get people, there's certain people you'll never get, but we're seeing, 90% of the people we're talking to, 95% of the people we're talking to are supporting this. And we did do a poll, went into every store over 3 days and talked to everyone who worked there, not the owners, but who worked there. And the data was incredible. It was 50% wanted to live 1 block away in an LCI. 64% wanted to ditch their cars and 75% wanted to walk or bike to work.
I think my big takeaway from a lot of these processes is elected officials are just really bad at gauging public opinion, and they really need to do better in not just listening to the people around them, which are probably the same demographic, and maybe the status quo works for them, and so they're going to organize to protect it. But there's especially Veronica Davies, her great work on inclusive transportation, she coined this phrase, the silently suffering. They are not represented these groups at the decision-making table, but they're the ones that will ultimately benefit from safer streets and more inclusive and accessible modes of transportation. And so we should be taking their voices into account as well.
Right. Well, that makes me think of number 3 on your list. And Lindsay, this is something you're good at, which is share stories rather than statistics. And I think that is such an important message. Lindsay, you're always talking about we can't build infrastructure for, just confident, strong bike riders. We need to build infrastructure for children. And I think that's a lot of the stuff that you talk about, Chris. Build it for the kids and everyone will use it.
Yeah, and that mantra, which my wife Melissa and I have kind of kept close to our hearts from the very beginning of this journey, when we were just advocating for better bike infrastructure in Vancouver, we saw as they provided safer space for cycling, the demographic and the diversity of people cycling was changing, and there were more women and children and families that were using the infrastructure. And so our motivation was to share those stories. Who are the people that are benefiting from better bike lanes, and because they're not necessarily represented in the media, and it's not the city is necessarily thinking about telling these stories, but you can talk about facts and figures and percentages and tons of carbon, and you're just going to get a blank wall. But if you can start relating to people at a human level and an emotional level, I think that's where you can start bringing them on board. And the old saying being that bringing facts to a culture war is like bringing a knife to a gunfight. We're past this point where you can sway people based on the facts. You have to really kind of sway them emotionally. And I to maybe allude to the next topic, I think children are at the front of that. And if we can talk about how they can be among the first to benefit from this, then we can go a long way to finding this type of consensus in our community.
And I would say that when children benefit, parents benefit because they don't spend all day in the car driving their children, which is, of course, what I spend a lot of my time doing. Can you talk about China and how some of this work is, coming back to China after being gone for, 20, 30 years or what? I mean, you know more than I, so.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I first went to Beijing and Shanghai earlier this year, it was very difficult to kind of get a gauge of what was happening there, because it's obviously, a bit of a hermetic country, and they're not necessarily sharing what they're working on. But through colleagues at the World Bank and ITBP and various other organizations, was able to get a sense of the gigantic U-turn that the government of China has done, and municipal governments all across the country have done, insofar as, of course, this was famously the kingdom of bicycles, where bicycles accounted for 40, 50, 60% of all journeys in these cities up until the 1980s. And then, through this lens of economic prosperity, the decision was made to encourage the car. And the rates of car ownership skyrocketed, and they took the infrastructure and the space away from the bicycles, and the bicycle became, not completely extinct, but definitely was getting close to there in the single figures in as late as the mid 2000s. And then from what we heard and what we were told, COVID was this light bulb moment in terms of a recognition that the spatial allocation, the way we move around cities, that a one-sided car-centric transportation system is very fragile to these types of shocks and interferences. And so Beijing in particular has been on this absolute tear of a construction project, 3,000 plus kilometers of bike lanes they've built in the last decade alone, reallocating space that was originally for bicycles given to the cars is now being given back to the bicycles. And cycling through Beijing really, is just awe-inspiring. The number of cyclists on the streets, the space that they're given, the priority that they're given. And from what we're hearing, this is just accelerating across the country as the national government is now giving to the cities this guidance to prioritize cycling there. I think now with the recognition that livability is just as, if not more important as economic prosperity, that maybe the rate of car ownership and electric car ownership in particular, which is quite impressive there, is also can be done in balance with space for bicycles, and particularly combining cycling with the public transport system and providing this alternative to the car for a lot of residents. So the Dutch Cycling Embassy is excited to potentially play a role in that, and yeah, I'll be headed back to Beijing tomorrow for some additional follow-up meetings with the Chinese ministry, and to present to the national conference there and to talk about next steps in terms of not just what the China can learn from the Netherlands, but I think what is most interesting from our side is what the Netherlands can now learn from China, because in a lot of ways they've leapfrogged the Netherlands in the quality and of infrastructure they're building, the level of ambition there. And I don't think it'll be long before there's a Chinese cycling embassy that is supporting their best practices.
Although I must add, Chris, it's a little bit easier when the government is, run by one person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big caveat and the big asterisk we need to put next to this is, there is a level of decision making that a autocratic government can make, from everything from cycling to high-speed rail to electric cars. When they decide to do something, it can be done very quickly and easily. But I think setting that aside, there's broader lessons here about cities in the 21st century, and we can find space for all modes of transportation ultimately, but for the benefit of the people and their physical health, their mental health, their social health, their economic health, we do need to provide this more balanced and diversified mobility system. And I think, this gigantic U-turn that China's making should be a warning sign to other economic superpowers like India, like Africa, where they're also headed down this American-inspired model towards motorways and car dependency, and perhaps they can skip that part a little bit and go straight to the multimodal transport system.
Apparently, Mumbai's air quality from the cars is so bad, it's like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes or 3 packs of cigarettes a day. I'd be really curious, you may not know now, but after your trip, what caused the U-turn? Because I think more than anything, what inspired them? I mean, obviously, I agree. And I was actually in China in the 90s, right before the Olympics, and they had just torn down the sort of pokey neighborhoods, with the windy streets, torn a lot of them down in Beijing to do these massive boulevards with these massive office towers. And I remember crossing one of the streets, and it was like 11 lanes, 15 lanes, and just, booking it. I couldn't get across. And it felt like progress, but it also really felt like it wasn't progress. And I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. Now I can see it. But I'd really be interested in their thinking and how they got here.
The Netherlands did its own U-turn in the 1970s away from car centricity. And that was motivated by a series of kind of a perfect storm of circumstances and crises. I think in this case, it was very similar. I've already mentioned COVID-19. I think the rise of the shared bike schemes have been also a catalyst here. There's 2 million shared bikes on the streets of Beijing, which is quite astounding, and they are privately owned and privately subsidized by questionable business models by companies like Alibaba. But it does mean that they're available for pennies a ride, and I used it almost everywhere I went while I was there. And it's almost negated the need for private bicycle ownership, because you don't need to own a bike anymore when it's pennies a trip. I think the availability of shared bikes, I think in a city like Beijing, the vast amount of space and the wide streets that they've inherited from the 20th century planners also are in their favor. Shanghai is maybe a slightly different story because it has less of a grid network. The streets are a bit narrow. We also heard that it is dependent on mayoral and municipal leadership, where Beijing maybe had a more bike-friendly mayor a mayor that visited the Netherlands on a number of occasions. The case wasn't true in Shanghai, and their mayor actually started banning cycling from specific streets. So I think in and of itself, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of these mega cities in China, and they each have their own unique circumstances and context. And political leadership is still a challenge there. But right now, everything we're hearing at the national level is the guidance, the resources that are available, and they're even putting together, standards and design manuals for cycling infrastructure to try to set the bar as high as possible as they build out these networks across the country. And that's a role that hopefully the Dutch Cycling Embassy can play in supporting.
Right. It's interesting you talk about bike share and the pricing of bike share. We were just talking about that recently on the show. And the idea that you should price bike share to change habits and to change the way people choose to get around is the proper price level, meaning a little bit cheaper than the bus or a little bit cheaper than the subway or something like that. And I've had experiences recently, both in New York City and in Vancouver, where the bike share was very expensive. And the further I ride the bike, the more I pay, as opposed to on the subway or the bus. I pay one fare and I can go as long as I want. And I think that's an area where the United States or North America in general can look at modeling, China and coming up with a price point on bike share that changes the behavior of the transportation user.
I think so. And I think very least bike share should be treated like public transportation. And it's not, the buses and the trams and trains aren't expected to make money or be revenue neutral. So why should we expect the bike sharing schemes to do the same? We subsidize them to provide alternatives to the car, which ultimately saves society money. But to ask governments to be that forward thinking can be quite difficult, especially in the year 2025.
Well, Lindsay, as you can attest to the meeting that you were just in, and I can, the meeting I was just in, so many civic leaders haven't read your books, haven't read How to Build Cycling Cities, or haven't read Curbed, your second book. Hopefully they will read Women Changing Cities, Global Strategies of Urban Transformation, because I feel like so many of those people are ignorant to what's being done in the Netherlands or what's being done in Vancouver or now even in Beijing.
Yeah, I mean, the motivation for the book and the reason we decided to go through this whole rigmarole of doing it a third time was we were, post-COVID looking at the cities where the big changes were happening. And the vast majority of them, with some exceptions, were being led by women mayors, women directors of transport, women ministers. And so we, Melissa and I, looked at each other and like, maybe there's something there worth investigating and exploring. And I think it's overly simplistic to say elect a woman and your city will transform, but there is certain leadership qualities that I think women have around empathy, around building coalitions and consensus about making change happen and not being obsessed with controlling and maintaining power. That means that the Anne Hidalgos of the world are the ones that are breaking through and
right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a gender thing, but these are leadership qualities that I think elected officials can learn and hopefully adapt. And it means that Paris is no longer the exception, but the rule in terms of the rate and the pace and the ambition of change that's possible with the right leadership in place.
Right.
I love that you're saying this so much. Because I'm out there talking to thousands of people. I'm probably closing in on 10,000 people. And these are difficult conversations. You get yelled at people, they're tears, right? And I feel like, years of being a mom, maybe and also I think women are more comfortable. I want to ask you about this sort of coming in under the problem rather than trying to confront the problem. Okay, let's bring people along. And I don't know where it's from, but I'm curious because I always think with Anne Hidalgo, I keep thinking the movie Ocean's 11, like it's a heist movie where she no one noticed that she took away all the parking without anyone realizing. And she brought in the bike lanes and the school streets, but it was all kind of quiet, like starting with the school streets. Who's going to get mad about that? I think she's taken 60% of the parking spots away, and people complain about it, but they don't quite, know when it happens. I'm just curious if you think that's sort of coming in under the problem, a little bit of a
Yeah,
hype.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think you've hit the nail on the head. And I would suggest it even started with the Paris plage, the beaches, the temporary beaches that they put on the Seine motorway, where it was like 30,000 cars a day were replaced with sand and deck chairs and palm trees. Who's going to argue with that every summer? And this kind of demonstrated this to Parisians that they could live without this arterial road. So I think they've been, and she's the first to admit when we spoke to her, she's standing on the shoulders of giants. It wasn't her. She's building off of the work of her male predecessors that laid a lot of this groundwork. But certainly once COVID hit, the plans were on the shelf that she dusted off and started to implement. And it's the bike infrastructure, it's the removal of car parking spaces, it's the school streets, it's the introduction of trees. I think once she started doing this, she was told she'd be a one-term mayor, and here we are. She's about to step down, having successfully been reelected, and now she's leaving on her own terms, and I think this is another female leadership quality, is knowing when to quit and step aside and give space for people with new ideas and new energy. Similar situation with Valerie Plante in Montreal, who we also interviewed for this book and Spotlight. She's stepped down after 2 terms. They're not just holding on to power for power's sake, which maybe some of the American elected officials sitting in the Senate and the House could learn from in their 70s and 80s. Yeah.
I think that women also I think it's the same reason that when you get a cyclist in a 1% lane, right, who's like very risk tolerant or even a risk seeker, they're predominantly men, right? And we see that in that 8% of people who are more, risk tolerant. And I just think maybe that's part of it too, is like I deeply empathize with people's fears because I share them. And I wonder if, a lot of the advocates are very risk tolerant. And I wonder if the women say, I really want a bike, but I really can't do it unless it's these circumstances.
Right. Yeah. Paint doesn't really work. Paint is not infrastructure. Right. Right.
The woman's experience of the city is very different than men. They use public space more intensely and obviously have different movement patterns and different concerns and different threats, not just from cars, but from men in general. And there is this built-in empathy, being a woman at the decision-making level, where you're designing for the most vulnerable citizens of your city and not just for the risk-tolerant, confident man that's jumping between his house and his office and not necessarily walking the streets, if you will, with children, with baby strollers, with elderly parents. And it's usually still the woman of the household that's doing a lot of that care work.
Right. Well, before we end, I want to go on record by saying I think women are great. So I'm really glad that we're doing this. Chris, your book comes out October 1st. It's called Women Changing Cities. And if you don't know Chris's other books, you got to look those up. Chris Bruntlett is the International Relations Director for the Dutch Cycling Embassy. Lindsay Sturman is the CEO and the corner office holder at LCI Livable Communities Initiative. Chris, thanks very much for giving us your time. We know you have a really busy schedule coming up.
No, thank you. And I really appreciate these conversations and our ongoing relationship and our ability to kind of act as a sounding board and let's keep fighting that good fight and changing not just hearts and minds, but physical streets. And momentum is on our side. It's just we gotta break through these silly little barriers, one person at a time.
Great to reconnect.
All right.
Nick, at the top of the show, I said, we've been having sound qualities because I've been traveling and I've been in Michigan. And you know who else is in Michigan?
I do. Do you want to tell our listeners?
Reo Ramsey is in Michigan. He's in Detroit, Michigan. And Reo comes on the show a lot to talk about the slow roll ride and push and pedal Sundays. And Reo, welcome back to Bike Talk, man.
What up, though, y'all? It's been a long time coming. But I'm back.
Yeah. How have you been?
Man, been great, y'all. How y'all been doing?
Good. Are you still in the pedicab business?
Yep. Still a little Lions game start back. I'm not Our next home game is tomorrow, Monday Night Football, so I'll be down there.
You take people to the game?
Yep, back and forth. Just flag me down anywhere downtown area. Detroit is one of the only places in the United States where all of our sports teams are directly across from each other. Lions, Tigers, Pistons, Red Wings, all within 2 blocks of each other.
And do you get to skirt all the traffic then in the pedicab?
Yes. Very much so. My Velo taxi is electric. Mine can go about 16 miles an hour, has a throttle, and it can go 30 miles range.
Tell us about Push and Pedal Sundays.
We just ended our season last week. We're shifting it more towards summer series than the fall, so I can focus on pedicab season. Well, more preferably Lion season. But with Push and Pedal Sundays, we meet from the Joe Louis Greenway every Sunday starting the first week in May. And every week we ride to a different Black-owned restaurant. And the purpose of this is to just show cycling's buying power, for one. When we go places, we tend to spend a lot of money. And also, in the African-American community, the dollar doesn't stay in the community no more than about 6 hours. And in other communities, it's much longer, much further. And so I wanted to put money back into our restaurants and answer the question of, what is Detroit food? What do we eat here? You see what I'm saying? When people ask, like, you go to places like New Orleans, you might go to Boston, you might go to Memphis, and you know the signatures in these places. But here, I just wanted to showcase some of those signatures.
Besides Stroh's beer, what do you eat?
I'd say a lot of things have changed here. When I was a kid, Greek food and Mediterranean food was the main thing here. Because Mediterranean people, we have more outside of the Mediterranean than anywhere else here, if you know what I mean. But in my culture, in my community, it's a plethora. So, like, you get a lot of soul food, like just diaspora food in general. So when I say diaspora food, I mean like West African food, Caribbean food, and a lot of foundational African-American food here. For example, we have a Burundian restaurant called Baobab Fair. Baobab Fair is the only Burundian restaurant in the United States.
Wow.
Right down the street, they have a Nigerian/Caribbean fusion place called Yum Village, like stuff like that. Across the street, you can go get soul food from the Joe Louis kitchen. Just trying to show the variety of the community.
That's great. And how many people are showing up on bikes?
We average between 20 and 30 people.
Yeah.
Some rides, the biggest ride we had this year was 80 people. So it just depends on the ride.
You say your season's over?
Yeah, our season's Push and Pedal Sundays is over till May 3rd, 2026. Every Sunday. Unless it rained, we rode.
So you went to how many different places over the whole season?
About 20.
And you're closing down because of the NFL season? Is that partly what's doing it?
Yeah, so I could focus on pedicab season. Going 20 weeks in a row doing the same thing can be brutal on your bike.
Right.
And so I wanted to make sure my team had all the repairs they needed. And then a lot of my team are parents. And not trying to tell their business, but just, I understand that cycling, now that I'm 35, is really a 30 and up game. So I just wanted to make sure that my friends who are 40 and between 25 and 40, that Push and Pedal Sundays tailors more to their lives. And how can Push and Pedals work for the community instead of how can the community work for Push and Pedals?
And are you still doing bike lights, Reo?
Absolutely. For those who don't know, and I might be saying this, it's not necessarily proving this, but I'm Michigan's #1 light salesman as far as bike lights. I sell the most variety here, and I provide the most options.
You're talking about the ones that really light up your bike at night.
Right. If a car hits you with my lights on, they did it on purpose.
That's a good motto.
Is that your ad campaign? That's a great ad campaign.
It's just facts. Very similar as Lit Riders who Bike Talk has interviewed before.
Yeah.
And just like a lot of the light festivals you see in California, shout out to Texas, a lot of the culture is in the Midwest as well.
The light up bike rides culture?
Right. I mean, a lot of that is Detroit as well, but we're just trying to keep people safe out here. Detroit is as far as major cities, it gets the 3rd most accidents out of any major city as far as bike accidents. So, and people here have zero issue unaliving you and keeping it moving.
Unaliving you.
Yeah. We want to keep people safe. So, and it's not me saying anything necessarily negative about Detroiters, but because the infrastructure here is new, as far as bike structure here, it's kind of terraforming in a sense. And so with the new a lot of new infrastructure, we want to make sure that people are as visible as possible. Just like you can see, if you was in the dark and a car was coming with no lights on, that's dangerous. And it's even more dangerous if you don't have lights. Plus, it's a state law. So it's just protection from the police.
And, that's one of the things that Jim Pokrass always talks about. If you have bike lights on your bike and you do get hit by a car, it increases your chance of getting an award in any kind of crash situation if you are following the law and well lit up. How do people find your lights, Reo?
You can follow me on Instagram or on TikTok, RK Mobile 313, Facebook as well. Any one of those three, it's all the same. RK Mobile 313. You can add me. I'm very easy to catch up with.
Great.
All right.
Reo Ramsey, RK Mobile 313, Pushing Pedal Sunday rides in Detroit, Michigan. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Anytime, fellas. See y'all in a minute.
Thanks, Reo Ramsey from Detroit.
Hit him up for a pedicab ride at the Lions game if you hear this, because that would be a great way to connect with Reo.
If you're in Detroit, yeah. And that's the show.
That is the show. We want to thank our guests, Monica Garrison of Black Girls Do Bike, Chris Bruntlett of the Dutch Cycling Embassy, Reo Ramsey of the Pushing Pedals Sunday Bike Ride, Robert Prinz of Bike East Bay, and Shulam from the West Hollywood City Council meeting speaking up for the protected bike lane on Fountain Avenue. We also want to thank our regulars, Julie Richard, Kevin Burton, Charlie Lighthizer, Amy Ziering, Lindsay Sturman, Stacy Randecker, and of course, Josh Hagland.
Do you have a quote?
I do. I ride a bike because walking is too slow and running requires too much effort. And that's true for me.
Most of these quotes are true.
Ride safe.
This episode of Bike Talk is sponsored by the law offices of Pokrass and De Los Reyes, with offices in Los Angeles and Bakersfield and serving all of Southern California.
Bike Talk is a project of CRSP and the Los Angeles Eco-Village Institute. And that was Bike Talk. If you have a story, a tip, or a topic, head over to biketalk.org and send us a message. Talk again next week.
Oh, get that car out of my way. I want to ride my bike today. It keeps me fit, gets me there. I won't go stinking up the air. Leave behind the daily grind. Let your mind unwind. Live its life, pretend to life. Better get yourself a bike. Get on your bike, sit on the seat.